Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhodge.
Hi, everyone. It's Roxanne Derhodge. Thanks again for tuning in this week. This week I have a colleague that I've known, Kristen, now for about, over 15 years, I guess, was how long we worked together. So Kristen, welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne.
Hi, Roxanne. Wonderful to be here.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kristen. And Kristen and I work together in corporate health and wellness consulting at one of the biggest health and wellness firms now, I would say, in North America. So for the last 10 years, Kristen has consulted with hundreds of organizations across various industries, helping create positive and productive workplaces. She has had specialties in talent management, leadership development, organizational wellness, team effectiveness, and performance management. You started your coaching practice back in 2017, which I've been privileged to watch her rise and go out on her own. And her mission in the workplace is to help leaders develop greater awareness and emotional intelligence and lead with courage, which I know is a big thing for leaders to have, and reach their full potential and bring out the best in their people. You also work with individuals. Kristen's a graduate of McMaster University. She has had some of the best coaching designations. She's done the Coach Training Institute, CTI, and the CPCC designation, which is the Certified Professional Coactive Coach, which I'm interested in hearing you talking a little bit about that. So, Kristen, is there anything that you'd like the listeners to know that I've missed here that speaks to kind of what you're doing out there in the workplace?
Yeah, no, I think you really covered it. I think the only thing I didn't mention there in the bio is I also do a lot of speaking on these topics. So working one-on-one with the coaching practice and then speaking with teams and with organizations and at conferences around these different subjects.
Awesome. So tell me, I mean, obviously going back, I think it was 15 years ago, that's when at that point we worked in health and wellness consulting. So tell me kind of your path and what you've done and what you've taken out of that kind of space into your own coaching. And know, because you work with individuals and organizations, what's the main kind of things that you focus on when you work with either individuals or organizations?
Yeah, so when we were working together, I was so passionate about that work from the health and wellness perspective because it does have such a big impact on the organization from a bottom line perspective, right? If you're creating an environment where people can bring their best selves to work, where they're feeling healthy, where they're feeling engaged, where they're feeling happy. And as I started to do the work at Chappelle FGI and then moved into my work at the McQuaig Institute and doing the HR consulting, a lot of times organizations would be focused on talent management and getting top talent and getting high potentials, which is wonderful. Of course, those are the people you want to work with in your organization. High potentials, high performers, most of them, 80% of them are passive candidates. So they're already working. They don't need to leave where they are to come to your organization. If they're going to leave, there's got to be a really good reason to leave and come to your place. And that's, they're looking for an organization that's going to have a positive culture, where there's going to be meaning in their work, where they can innovate, where they can be creative, where they can use all of their talents. So what I started to notice is, yes, this emphasis on getting the right people, but in order to have the right people, there needs to be more of an emphasis on what kind of culture are you trying to create in an authentic way, not who you say you are, but who you really are in terms of living and breathing those values. And the other place is really helping leaders, because when you have those individuals come and work for you, they need to be supported by leaders who are going to help unleash all of their potential. So from my perspective, I love also helping leaders to get more attuned with who they are, go on their own journey of self-awareness, because the more they know themselves, the more they can help the people around them, bring the best out of those individuals, and create really positive work environments where the team, there's this beautiful team cohesion, and they're all working together with these common goals.
So obviously there's core elements that makes an authentic leader. And when you go into organizations that are trying to attract, let's say, top talent is hard to harness, right? Like, oftentimes the competitors are looking at, the top 2% of those top performers and saying, what is it that we could do to attract someone like that? So what are some of the core elements that you see out there that some of the organizations that you've worked with, or maybe the ones that you haven't worked with, that you recognize that they need to implement in order to even get prepped, not even just for the high performance, but just to keep most of their population engaged in their vision and their mission?
Yeah. So I think one of the things you just ended off with there is important, is getting really clear on who they are as an organization. What is their mission? What is their purpose? And that should come from the top and come all the way down, right? So cascade down, so that everyone, no matter what your role is in the organization, they understand how they're linked to that bigger mission. I love how I think Starbucks does such a good job of doing that. Like, everyone, doesn't matter if you're a barista in the store, if you're in corporate, it really came from the top, and this understanding around, like, this is who we want to be at Starbucks, and this is what it means to work here. So everybody shared that common purpose, mission, goals. And then the other piece is, I hear so many organizations saying, we're innovative. We create environments where people can innovate and they can change and they can be creative and do all of this kind of stuff. But they don't actually create the space for that to happen. In order for innovation to happen, you have to actually create an environment where people are allowed to try, to experiment, and to fail, because you're going to try things that are not going to work, and then that failure will lead to something else, which will lead to something else. So I think actually being a culture that creates that space for people to fail and to experiment and actually try things. It's one thing to say that, it's another thing to actually do it and create the environment. So where I see where cultures can really improve is getting really clear in who they are as a culture, and then making sure, like, what does that look like? What are those values? And then what are the behaviors associated with those values? And there's accountability when those values are not being honored and those behaviors are not being honored, so that people are like, okay, so it's who they say they are is authentic. It's not this disconnect where they say this is what we're all about, but then the behaviors and the actions do not line up.
So how would they tie into accountability, into strategy? Like, let's say, I'm recognizing that my middle managers, they seem to have more of a disconnect. And we know that middle management is kind of so important because they're the ones in the trenches taking care of so many things, and they're busy, right? To put it bluntly, with my portfolio in health and wellness, I was managing about 50 companies at the time that we worked together.
Yeah.
And I could see how overwhelmed that particular slice of the companies were. They were constantly overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So what kind of things have you seen in reference to accountability that's not scary? It doesn't go on the performance review per se, but it may be hooked to, bottom line in some way. But what are other ways that you've seen organizations do it that seems to have a buy-in from the individuals that work with them?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So I think one thing is when you're even talking about performance, tying it into, like, if we're saying these are the values of our organization, these are the behaviors. So at the end of the year, when there's bonuses shouldn't be just about bottom line in terms of you hit your numbers. The bonuses should also be associated, these values and behaviors that we're looking for in this role. This is how you demonstrated this, and that's where, so you're actually literally being bonused out for that. That's very motivating. So actually tie financial bonuses towards that. The other thing is, and I like what you were mentioning there, it's true, like, how often do you see these leaders who are burnt out, they're running from thing to thing, they have too much on their plate. So the other is the onus is, we put so much onus on that manager reporting into the leader. How is that leader that manager is reporting into, what are they doing? Like, how are they accountable? How are they supporting that person? Are they doing weekly check-ins, monthly check-ins, asking them what they need, how I can better support you? Where are you feeling overwhelmed? Like, is that conversation even happening? Because a lot of times it's not. So you're holding your middle managers accountable without holding the leaders that those middle managers are reporting into. So I think there should be that support. And then they're asking them, like, what do you need from me? How can we make this run even better? And sometimes there's things that just through having that conversation, efficiencies that can be created. Maybe you have somebody supporting that person, an admin person coming in and doing some of these tasks that's not the best use of their time. And now all of a sudden those efficiencies are being traded off. So there should be those conversations where the leaders are asking how they can be supporting them.
Absolutely. And I think, skill development is one thing. And oftentimes we go to the hard, you need to be able to do this more efficiently, those types of things. But I think on the soft end, and, I know you've been exposed to CEOs that are so connected, and you want to work hard for them. I know with some of the organizations that I've worked with, and others you think, oh boy, I'm just going to do what I got to do, and I got to, clear out the way. And it's that engagement, transparency, they're real. And I know gone are the days when I started in the industry where it was kind of like the CEO was somebody, and I often think of the owner of the company that we worked with. There was an example where a couple of us were getting on the elevator, and you wouldn't have worked there at the time. And so he got on, so I got on, and a couple of people actually got off the elevator because they were intimidated to be in the same elevator with him. And I said, well, why? I said, this man's a visionary. He's created such a big industry. The pleasure is to spend 3 seconds in an elevator going down a couple of floors just by engaging him. Yeah. But again, that's a different context. Whereas now, it's not unlike that any of us in organizations would stand up and say, help me understand what I'm missing. But I think it's a different shift in culture. Would you agree? And of course, now with the millennials and what we know with them, they're hardcore checking out organizations and really seeing if their mission and vision is in line with what they want in their career.
Yes, it's absolutely, like it is, like you're saying, more transparent and more open, and people are more comfortable being curious and asking questions. And that same scenario in the elevator with the CEO will say, hey, so what's our goals for 2018 and 2019? Where are we going? What's the vision? They'll be comfortable asking those questions. And from the CEO's perspective, that's a beautiful thing. That shows an engaged employee. The engaged employee wants to know where we're going. We're curious, what's happening. I mean, an example of not doing that, I always like to talk about the CEOs who are doing it really well and the CEOs who are not. I always think about, I'm forgetting his name right now, but the former CEO of Uber. I remember him getting really irate when customers would be making suggestions or asking questions like, these are your people who work for you, and it's not a matter of they're trying to fight you, but there was so much ego that got involved and lack of self-awareness that he was actually getting upset where anyone would have suggestions around how he might be able to be doing things a little bit differently. So it kind of makes me think of those leaders who are the leaders in the CEOs, and I'm sure you could attest to this, that do really well and engage their workforce. They leave the ego at the door. Right? It's like when you start to bring the ego into it and you can't tell me anything because I'm the CEO and you're there. No, they have lots to share with you. They have ideas. They're in the trenches. So when there's that openness to hear what they have to say, that's where, there's so many great ideas that aren't even being heard. So I think the CEOs who are willing to have those conversations, I would still say there's some that are still old school and aren't there yet, and they need to go there because that's the path forward.
But the thing is, to a lot of frontline employees' perceptions is we're still doing well. We've grown. We've been the icon in the industry. So what's the impetus for these CEOs to make a shift? And in coaching some of the high-level individuals, it has to be a heightened person. If it's a company that's been successful, maybe with the old kind of model, to want to really make that shift. Would you agree?
Yeah, and the problem is you see these organizations that end up going out of business because they think they can just continue being who they were. But as you see with technology and how things change so rapidly,
Mhm.
you need to be constantly evolving, right? So I think that can get you in a lot of trouble when you stay comfortable.
Well, I interviewed somebody once, or was in a conversation, and he was pretty senior. It was on a senior team, and they hired a consulting firm, like not a lot of HR consulting or whatever, to come in because on their exit interviews, which I know is very telling, um, people would share these things that were, less than professional, or just more like a toxic kind of situation, or they couldn't keep people at that higher level of executives. So they brought in this firm. The firm, did all the, the 360s or whatever other assessments that they would have done,
Yeah.
came back all good.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, this particular team member was telling me that everybody was truly afraid, not in a toxic way, but in a respect kind of way, to say truly what
Mhm.
they felt. So they gave the external consultant the
Mhm.
answers they wanted them to hear, because they were concerned that that might in
Mhm.
some way reflect what feedback the CEO got, and in any way that the CEO would be able to figure out potentially which part of his team was kind of sharing things.
Yes.
So at some point, one individual that came was attached in some way said, it's an interesting, because your metrics or your numbers are not lying to you. You look at retention, and you've done a lot with talent management, so I'm interested in that. Your bottom line is telling you you can't retain people. We know how expensive it is to lose someone.
Yeah.
So what are your numbers telling you? Because something here is not adding up. And then eventually what started to happen is a bit of a time, some people got more comfortable
Yeah.
because the CEO was more very, what we call left-brained, or, very Einstein-y,
Yeah.
was huge visionary, but really couldn't tether to the ground. And he would litanize potentially all the things he needed to get, and he wasn't connecting.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he was inadvertently, even though he was a brilliant man, really not supporting people in a way, and they felt like they were kind of thrown on the bus each time they had an interaction, because they could never kind of keep up with what his expectations were.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what you just said there too is the connection piece, right? You see this where people are brilliant and they have all of the technical skills, but the soft skills, which I wish there was a different word, and that's why I say emotional intelligence, because
Yeah.
there's nothing soft about it. It's soft in that, I guess you can say, the way they're coming out, but they're so critical to success, because you can be so brilliant and be the visionary and do all of that kind of stuff. But if you can't communicate, you can't interact, you can't help people understand that vision, and also create an environment where they feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Psychological safety is huge, right? Because if they don't have that psychological safety, they're not going to tell the truth. And I find a big piece of creating the psychological safety with leaders, and I work with a lot of leaders in this area, is vulnerability, which is showing up and even admitting, like, even if he as a leader said, where he does something and said, hey, I really failed there. Like I didn't handle that the way I could have handled it, right? The more they share parts of themselves and share how they're human and they make mistakes just like everybody else, then now there's this level of this psychological safety. There's some trust. Now people can start communicating and sharing, well, one thing I noticed was X, Y, Z, and then now they're communicating how they were feeling. But vulnerability it's a big one. It's it feels uncomfortable. And I
Yes.
think a lot of leaders, they start to notice a great deal of success when they build that skill, which is very learnable. Like it's not something you either have or you don't have. We all have it. It's just tapping into it.
Right, because I mean, in MBA school, I don't know how much time they would be spending talking about vulnerability and connection and EI and things of that nature, right? They're marketing and R&D and all that other stuff, which is very, very necessary for the
Yeah.
world of business.
Yeah.
But really, on the other end, what we're finding is like you're using the Starbucks of the world and stuff like that. Where people are loving on these companies, but now your customer is on the web. So no longer are you just meeting in a boardroom like we used to years ago to talk about, what the quarter is going to look like and the growth perspectives, but you have people kind of coming from your customers can make comment on your product from anywhere, or your service. What a big pressure. And then if you're disconnected from that, the impact of that is huge.
Yes, yes. And if you have happier employees, you have happier customers. And there can be such an emphasis on happier customers, but not enough emphasis on happier employees.
So tell me, when with your customers, how do they come to you? And if people, like, how you work with individuals, because I know you work with individuals, but you also work with corporations. So share with us kind of how you intervene with individuals, and if people listening were wanting to understand your model, if you could share a bit about that so they can get an understanding, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. Thanks for asking. So when I work with either individuals or leaders in organizations, it's very similar in that my shortest engagement is at least 6 months, and most often that 6 months leads to another 6 months, so 6 months to a year, because we're really looking for meaningful change here, right? So it's not the Band-Aids, it's not just doing these 2 or 3 sessions and we're done. It's really helping people go deeper and getting to know themselves better and make lots of different shifts. So in terms of individuals and how they find me, I mean, a lot of my clients have found me through referrals, speaking engagements, me working with organizations and building relationships. But I think the best way with coaching, it's really, really about fit, right? There has to be this feeling of connection and safety, like we're talking about safety, where that person really feels like that's a person that I can trust and be vulnerable with and go everywhere I need to go, and not hold yourself back, right? So from my perspective, anytime somebody's looking to consider coaching, I love to just have a conversation, right? Talk for an hour, talk 45 minutes or an hour. But what I do when that conversation is actually do some coaching so that person can really feel and experience what coaching's like. I personally, as someone who has experienced coaching, and obviously I'm so passionate about it, I think every single person could benefit from coaching, because it's just like you yourself, where you think you can go, and then having somebody who's there mirroring back to you and helping you see blind spots and limiting beliefs, places where you're holding yourself back, can just help you like push yourself to go to places that you never even thought possible, you never even anticipated. So that's what I really think the role of the coach is. And I specifically love working with leaders because they're impacting a lot of people. I also love working with people who are ready to sometimes make shifts. So in terms of meaningful work, maybe they're doing something and they're realizing like, this is not the work that I'm meant to be doing in the world. They want to make a bigger impact. And sometimes it's getting through the fears and limiting beliefs that are holding themselves back from really going out there in a bigger way. So I love just having conversations and giving people an opportunity to experience coaching and what it's like.
So you're kind of like the vein that allows them to really be, and oftentimes, when I coach or see my clients also, it's really feeding back to them and challenging them to really see it from a different, like, why can't you do that? Like, you have this vision, I've heard you say this or this, and they go, oh, wow, yes, I guess I must, because I just basically regurgitated some of the things that you shared with me, kind of thing. So you're right, and we all need that, right? Because with our unconscious brain, and it's going all the time, there's a lot of white noise, isn't there? When in our brains, right? And we know we have a love or a passion, but those pushback or those thoughts that are sometimes, 60,000 thoughts in a day, and how many of those really work against us just because, right? We just kind of let it create a space for itself, and it becomes bigger, or we kind of push back the other way to kind of challenge ourselves to think a bit more subjectively, to get out of our frame of reference and see it for what it is versus what I think it is, how I interpret it. So that the value of a coach there is very, very key. Yeah. So tell us a bit about some of the speaking that you do, and what kind of topics do you focus on? Is it talent management? Is it authenticity with leaders? Where do you the focus of your speaking engagements? Where do they focus?
Yeah, so I definitely focus on emotional intelligence. So specifically with leaders, I love helping them learn around self-awareness and emotional intelligence and how it's such a critical skill and their ability to be a really good leader. Specifically that same content from an individual perspective as well. I love doing work around mindfulness. I work with a lot of clients who are highly successful, but they are also highly burnt out. Right? They're working 90-hour work weeks, running, racing, and helping them just take a step back. A lot of my clients end up getting into doing meditation and, but not even just meditation, mindfulness, hour to hour, and getting back to their breath and checking in with themselves and also being fully present, right? We can be just like you were saying, 46.9% of the time we're thinking about something other than what we're actually doing. Mm-hmm. So instead of like being there doing a task, you're thinking about the past, what's happening a week from now. So that makes us feel really frazzled and disconnected from our work. So I love helping organizations and then the individual to really get connected to mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And then just the individual, helping them, like we were talking about with the mindset piece, right? That our thoughts are so powerful and our thoughts can really empower us, or our thoughts can really hold us back and keep us from living a really rich, fulfilling, successful life. But I find it's this kind of the whole happiness and success conundrum. The happier you are, the more successful you actually become, as opposed to the more successful you are, the happier you are, right? So it's getting them connected to that.
Yes.
And being intentional.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, not just haphazard kind of, oh, I'm just going to see, what happens today kind of thing. So with mindfulness in the workplace, because obviously, in one-to-one coaching and things like that, it's kind of a given. We recognize in order to really stay focused, we need to stay, we need to declutter, I often say, right? Yeah. It's kind of like we can't go too long without putting out the garbage, because eventually things are going to pile up. It's the same thing with our brain. Yeah. So in companies and with also even maybe senior executives, how open are they to the concept? I mean, with some of the industries that we dealt with, the norm, like in legal, the norm on a partnership is like sometimes 80, 90 hours a week. Female lawyers, they can't retain past, 32 once they've had their first child. There's certain industries that have certain stressors that they're not going away. But people that decide to stay in those, how open are they to things like mindfulness, even though the craziness of the hours may not lessen as much?
Yeah, I definitely think the appetite is there. I think that, and even like looking at those ones like legal firms, and I have even seen some legal firms that are making strides in changing the culture. I do find it starts from the top, and that's sometimes because they're females that are starting the law firms, and they're demanding for this, they're creating it, so they get to decide what that looks like. But I think that even with the working, if it's, you're still going to work the 80 or 90 hours, you can still work the 80 or 90 hours in a more productive way. And sometimes it's even about helping them understand some of those skills that are so counterintuitive, which is like, give yourself 20 minutes for lunch and leave your desk and let yourself clear your mind, because then you come back and you're so much more refreshed, right?
Right.
So even those little tools that they can be using throughout the day, or allowing themselves like in the evenings to be able to go to yoga or a meditation class or something, to be able to, like you're saying, I like that language around the garbage and decluttering and getting that all out, so that even when they are there, they're actually enjoying those 80 or 90 hours, as opposed to kind of being in it and like racing and not taking care of their health, not paying attention to what they're eating, not taking care of their mind. So at least if they could be putting some of those things into practice, then it feels, the way they're experiencing work starts to feel different.
Absolutely. And I would think too, with some organizations, again, if we're talking about talent retention, that's got to be big, right? Like if you're on a senior executive team in a high-powered industry that's, in growth mode, we know how that goes. We've all been there. Yeah. It's like, okay, we'll relax when we're done, which was the concept from years ago that we would see in a lot of industry. And now we're recognizing, well, there won't be much left of anybody at that point. So it's kind of doing the small incremental things. And a lot of times in my coaching or my practice, I'll talk about little minutes, what you can do in a couple minutes here or there. And people go, well, people think that they have to have this grandiose concept of what mindfulness really is. And they go, and then I'll teach them one or two things and they go, wow, I can't believe that really works.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's the same kind of thing that you do, which is cumulative effects, right? It's the same thing as burnout, right? You're going the opposite way. If you could do periodic things, like you said, something as, if I can't leave my office, to turn off every potential electronic around me, right? Or even take off the light in my office and just close my eyes and listen to my breath, is something that you could do, kind of thing. But again, some of those things weren't promoted in the corporate sector for a long time.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And also there's an onus on the organization to create some of those boundaries as well, right? So if you're saying people aren't expected to be answering emails or messages outside of work hours, then your leaders better not be sending emails at 9:00 at night or 5 a.m. in the morning, right? So it's setting those boundaries as well, because it's one thing to say you're not expected to respond to the email, but the email is still being sent, and then that individual feels an onus on them. So the organization also has, and I think there's this kind of this perception sometimes, it's like either the organization or it's the individual. I think it's really about both of them working in tandem. The organization should be setting some boundaries and having some accountability and responsibility. The individual should also be setting boundaries, accountability, responsibility for themselves, right? Because I'm not for the victim mentality either, right? Like if you're in a situation and you don't like it, you also have the opportunity to change and go somewhere else too, right? So it's making sure both groups are taking responsibility.
Absolutely. And you sometimes the resources are there on employees who I just don't have time,
Right.
but they're struggling, right? Then it's like, okay, well, if that's a benefit that you've gotten and you can use it anywhere, and we know now the modalities for some of those resources are quite accessible. We're all on our remote or our mobile devices. There's lots of things that you can do, right? So I think you're absolutely, because what you don't want is that if you're not taking responsibility and the organization is offering it to you and you're not using that benefit, then at some point you have to weigh it out and say, okay, either I need to change my sandbox or I have to change something within my sandbox so I can, take better care of myself. Now, do you find that with some of the HR policy, are you seeing a lot of shifts in HR policy to implement things like mindfulness or work-life balance strategies, from an HR perspective? What kind of things have you seen probably in the industry, maybe since I've kind of been out for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is I'm definitely seeing it evolving and organizations are getting it. And there's way, way, way more companies that are getting curious about it, asking about it, having it available. They're even having, some organizations will do like the 8-week mindfulness training and have someone come into the organization and doing it.
Right.
They are definitely evolving. Like anything, different organizations are at different stages. So I think some, their cultures are a little bit behind and they haven't gotten there. But definitely in the last, I've noticed in the last 5 years for sure, way more of an appetite, conversations, understanding, excitement around mindfulness. And not only just about like the bottom line for the organization, how it's going to impact them, but a sincere caring about the employee and not wanting the employee to be burnt out. Like I definitely see there's a lot of good companies out there. There's definitely room for growth, for more to be doing this. And it was funny when you started to bring up HR and rules and compliance, because that's where I think HR also has an opportunity to not be just about rules, compliance, and that kind of stuff. Like from a strategic standpoint, I think that they really have an opportunity, and a lot more organizations are, understanding that HR is just as important as whoever is running that organization and them working together. But they also HR has to make sure that they are being strategic and looking at the bigger picture around the organization.
Right, because I know that was also an issue when I worked in corporate wellness, was HR feeling worthy to have a voice at the executive table. right?
Yeah.
So yes, you have compliance, there's certain things, but
Yes.
what we focused on has really been, like you said, the EQ of the organization,
Yeah.
and the value of recognizing that if you take care of your people really, really well, ultimately your bottom line, like your short-term and your long-term claims, which is the world we lived in, to create a business case. And unfortunately, with things which has grown exponentially, since we've been in that kind of setting, is that things like anxiety and depression is on the rise. Like, so don't tell me that it's all of a sudden everybody biologically that has ever had an issue with anxiety and depression, that's increased. We know that a lot of it is situational.
Yeah.
It's not taking the small steps to be able to, years ago when our parents worked, they came home, you never saw I never did with my dad, even though he was an executive, the phone was never on his hip, the iPad was not, on the counter at the kitchen table, those types of things. So it's really about adjusting that perspective about how we're going to, I'm going to say, protect our mental capacity. And we think of mental illness, but really it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum, and we're taxing our brain so much that it's almost like, how do we do those respite exercises? We all have to sleep, but how do we kind of shut off our brain to be able to go to work again the next day and the next day and the next day?
Well, and Roxanne, what you're saying is so important, because just like you were describing with your dad and coming home, that's not only impacting that executive, that's impacting their family, like the next generation. So what's that like for those kids? As a child, you would have had, your dad shut off work, came home, and now he's fully connected to you. Well, so now you have these kids where the parents, there's a disconnect around their relationship and their connection.
Absolutely.
So that's impacting the next generation and how they're going to show up. So, that's what I love around when you're coaching leaders, all of the self-awareness and all these ways that they grow. It doesn't just impact them as a leader, it impacts them as a husband, it impacts them as a dad. Like, now they're fully present in their life. And the other thing it made me think of, as you were saying that, around, the organization's appetite for mindfulness, that's getting really good. But where I still see there's a disconnect is organizations investing in leaders. Like, they're still not, when I go to talks and ask conversations around who has executive coaching available for your leaders, who's doing focus, long-term leadership development programs for your leaders, there's not enough hands that go up in the room.
Right. So they recognize there's a need, but their investment isn't there yet, potentially for them to recognize. And maybe, I don't know how that works, but when we look at the metrics for short-term and long-term, I would wonder what percentage is in their senior leadership team, because unfortunately, high performers, they're like the bug that hits the windscreen, just they fall pretty quickly, but they can take a lot before they fall. Would you agree with that? Because they're high functioners, sometimes, unfortunately, because of their aptitude and acumen, they can extend, and other parts of their life may be falling apart, but they're able to compartmentalize, do a job very well. And, and you may not see them bearing out as much as maybe, say, the average frontline person, in leaves or maybe incidental absences, those types of things too.
Right. And they struggle with asking for help because they want to do it all by themselves and they can figure it out. And so, I definitely see many organizations who are investing in executive coaching, but I think that there definitely could be more, and it has such an impact on, it does have a huge impact on the bottom line, because that leader is impacting, especially when you're at the executive level, because that leader is leading other leaders who are leading other leaders. But I even think mid leaders and up, you've got these emerging leaders who were high performers. Now all of a sudden they're leaders. Everything shifts. Like, what they were doing as an individual contributor and what they're doing as a leader, a lot of people don't know what that looked like until they get into it, and all of a sudden they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with people stuff all day long, right? It's not them just doing
right. So I'm going from management, which is more, actual skills to manage the day-to-day, to go to leadership, where now you're taking an aerial view and your role is ready to lead people. Yes. Right. And a lot of people, you're right, they get pulled up the ranks because they're very good and they've achieved a lot, and now they're in charge of people. And they have, they're maybe not so bad, but they need that skill to be able to, support people, to be able to still manage, but to also have people follow them in a way. And their spare the people that their impact get bigger and bigger every level that you go up.
Yeah.
So that's really, really important. So, so for anyone listening, so this is amazing. It sounds like I should call you because I'm coaching. So where can people reach you? Because I know you had said that they have the capacity to do some sort of exploratory or a discovery session with you. So tell people where they can reach you and organizations that may want to consult with you or have you speak at their organizations.
Yeah, thanks for Roxanne. So my website's pretty easy. It's Kristen Harcourt. So KristenHarcourt.com. You can get a little bit more information on some of my background and would love to, I'm always open to a conversation, no pressure. We just see where it goes, right? It's just starting off with the conversations, taking a step.
Awesome. And I've gained so much today just from listening and recognizing what parallels we have, even though our backgrounds kind of came from different spots, yourself in HR and business development, and mine as a psychotherapist in account management, and then, so it's kind of those worlds collided when we were at, what's now Warner Chappelle together. So for everyone listening, if anything, I've listened to Kristen today, the importance of being real, and which is my, concept about being authentic. And the more connected you are to yourself, and recognize that we all have things that we continually need to work on, but to be gentle and kind to yourself day to day, something very, very small impacts you, and then I often say it impacts the people around you, which I call the concentric circles around you. So the better and more connected you are to yourself, just imagine the gift that you're giving to the others around you. So again, thanks again, Kristen, for sharing your time with us. And we'll talk to you soon. If you're wanting anything more with myself, you can go to my website at roxannederhodge.com /blueprint, where you'd have access to a free course. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com /blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.